Rain streaked down the windows of Vantage Tower when Thea Morris made her first mistake. She extended her hand to the most dangerous man in Seattle, and 3 seconds later she understood why her handler had warned her never to touch him. "I don't shake hands, Miss Morris." His voice was low, controlled, the kind of voice that didn't need volume to fill a room. He stood behind a desk that probably cost more than her yearly salary, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows and the grey Seattle skyline beyond, and he hadn't moved an inch since she'd walked in. Hadn't offered her a seat, hadn't done anything except watch her with those dark eyes, so deep brown they were almost black, cataloguing every twitch and breath like he was reading a language she didn't know she was speaking. Thea let her hand drop. Heat crawled up her neck, and she hated herself for it. Without thinking, she reached up and pulled a strand of auburn hair to her lips. An old habit, something she'd done since childhood, something Nora used to tease her about before Nora became a ghost. At 28, Thea Morris had learned to use her appearance as a weapon. The chestnut waves that fell past her shoulders, the wide-set green eyes that made people want to trust her, the delicate features set in fair porcelain skin, all of it carefully cultivated, carefully controlled. She was petite, barely 5'3", the kind of woman people underestimated, the kind of woman who could slip into rooms unnoticed, who looked fragile until you saw the steel in her spine, the perfect face for a spy. But under August Kim's gaze, she felt stripped bare, exposed, like he could see past the careful makeup and the professional blazer to the scared girl underneath. 8 years. 8 years since her sister had vanished, and Thea still reached for comfort like a child. "I don't like being touched," August continued, and his tone made it clear this wasn't an apology, it was a law. "By anyone, for any reason, this is not negotiable." She had been briefed, of course. Diana Hayes, her handler at G-Tech, the Global Tech and Ethics Commission, a shadow agency that hunted the world's most dangerous technologies before they could be weaponized, had spent 3 hours preparing her for this moment, drilling the details of August Kim's empire into her head until they felt like her own memories. Vantage Systems was just the public face. The real power was Onyx, a system that could analyze a person's micro-expressions and predict their actions with 87% accuracy. But that wasn't what made him dangerous. What made him dangerous was what he did with that information. August Kim knew secrets, everyone's secrets. Politicians who had buried scandals, CEOs who had committed fraud, criminals who thought they were untouchable. He had built a shadow empire on blackmail and leverage, a web of influence that stretched from Silicon Valley to Wall Street to the darkest corners of the international underworld. They called him the king of the tech underworld, a kind of tech mafia, the man who could destroy anyone with a single phone call, the billionaire who had made governments tremble and crime syndicates bow. Diana had been very clear. August Kim wasn't just a tech mogul. He was a predator who had turned information into the most dangerous weapon on the planet. And Thea was about to walk into his cage. August Kim. 41 years old, son of a Korean tech pioneer and an American heiress, a combination that had given him high cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass, a strong jaw that spoke of his mother's New England bloodline, and skin the color of warm honey that seemed to glow in the gray Seattle light. His dark hair was swept back from his face, silver threading through the temples in a way that should have made him look older, but somehow only added to the sense of controlled power. He was tall, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that tapered to narrow hips, the kind of lean, predatory build that came from discipline rather than vanity. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Deep brown, so dark they were almost black, framed by thick lashes that any woman would envy. Eyes that held the stillness of a predator who had never needed to chase his prey. Eyes that had seen men beg and women weep and empires crumble, and had watched it all with the same cold calculation. Diana hadn't prepared her for the way he smelled, sandalwood and leather with something darker underneath, something that made her think of locked rooms and secrets kept too long. She caught it when he moved around his desk, when he stepped close enough that she could see the fine weave of his charcoal suit, and her body responded before her mind could stop it. Goosebumps rising on her arms, breath catching somewhere in her throat. He noticed. "You're nervous," he said. "But not about the job." It wasn't a question. Thea felt her spine go rigid. Anyone would be nervous at an interview. Your left hand keeps reaching for something that isn't there. He tilted his head, studying her like she was a code he was breaking in real time. A childhood habit, I'd guess. Something comforting. And you've looked at the door twice since I walked in. A pause, deliberate as a knife. Exit strategy. Ice flooded her veins. She had trained for years to control her tells, to become whoever a mission required, and this man had stripped her bare in 30 seconds. She wanted to run. She wanted to lean closer. She wasn't sure which impulse scared her more. "I'm just observant," she managed. The corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile. "So am I." The interview had technically started 20 minutes ago, but Thea was only now beginning to understand that it had never been an interview at all. It was an autopsy. Every question he asked, from her educational background to her previous employment to her reasons for leaving her last position, felt like a scalpel sliding beneath skin. She answered with her cover story, the careful lies Diana had helped her construct, but each time she spoke, she could feel him weighing her words against something she couldn't see. And beneath it all, another weight, one she carried everywhere, had carried for 8 years, since the morning the police had shown up at her door to tell her that her sister Nora was gone. 22 years old, last seen with an older man she refused to name. No body, no note, no explanation, just an empty room and a silence that had never stopped echoing. Thea had joined G-Tech because they had resources, because they could find people who didn't want to be found, because somewhere out there Nora was waiting, and Thea would tear down every wall in the world to get to her. But right now, standing in August Kim's glass tower, she was the one who felt found. "You'll start tomorrow," he said, and the words landed like a verdict. "You'll live here, in the penthouse. All personal items will be provided." Thea blinked. "Live here?" "My assistant needs to be available at all times." He moved toward the door, dismissing her without a backward glance. "Your room has been prepared. Your phone will be replaced with a company device. Your clothes will be waiting in the closet." Every alarm in her head was screaming now. This wasn't infiltration. This was captivity dressed in silk. "That seems extreme," she said carefully. He stopped at the door, turned just enough to show her his profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the silver at his temple. "I'm an extreme man, Miss Morris." And then, just as she thought he was leaving, he spoke again, still not looking at her, voice dropping to something that was almost soft. "One more thing. I know when someone is lying to me." A pause that seemed to stretch forever. "And you've lied 3 times in the last 10 minutes. Tomorrow, I expect the truth. Or at least better lies." He left. The door closed behind him without a sound, and Thea stood alone in his office, heart pounding, reaching up without thinking to pull a strand of hair to her lips. That old habit. The one Nora used to tease her about. She was supposed to be the hunter here. She was supposed to slip in, steal his secrets, and disappear. But something had shifted in the last 20 minutes. Some balance of power she hadn't even known she was fighting for, and she was no longer sure who was hunting whom. The rain streaked down the windows like tears, and somewhere in this tower, August Kim was watching, waiting, knowing things about her that she hadn't told anyone. The game had changed. The rules were his, and Thea was playing for her life. The room they gave her was beautiful in the way that hospital rooms were beautiful. Clean lines, neutral colors, everything designed to keep you calm while you slowly went insane. Thea stood in the doorway for a long moment, taking inventory of her new cage. A bed that could have slept 4. A closet already full of clothes she hadn't chosen. A bathroom with marble counters, and a shower big enough to host a small party, and no lock on the door. She had noticed that immediately. The first thing any operative checked, and the absence was screaming at her now. Her phone was gone. They had taken it at the lobby, apologetic but firm, and replaced it with a sleek black device that she already knew was monitored. Her suitcase sat on the bed, but when she opened it, she found only what they had allowed her to bring. Toiletries, a few personal items. Nothing that could be used as a weapon, nothing that could help her contact the outside world. The clothes in the closet were all her size. Every single item, from the underwear in the drawers to the dresses hanging in neat rows, had been selected for her body, her coloring, her measurements. Someone had studied her. Someone had prepared for her arrival with the kind of attention to detail that made her skin crawl. She thought about running, thought about walking out the door, taking the elevator down, disappearing into the Seattle rain. But she had a mission. She had onyx to find, secrets to steal, and somewhere out there, Nora was still waiting. Thea sat on the edge of the bed and let herself feel it for exactly 30 seconds. The fear, the sense of walls closing in, the knowledge that she had walked into something much bigger than a simple infiltration job. She gave herself half a minute to be human, to be scared, and then she locked it all away behind the same walls she used for everything else. Diana's voice in her head. Don't get close. Just watch, record, and extract. But Diana hadn't mentioned the way August Kim looked at her, hadn't warned her about the way his presence seemed to fill every room, the way his silence felt heavier than most people's words. Hadn't told her that he would strip away her defenses in 30 seconds flat and leave her feeling more exposed than she had in years. A knock at her door made her jump. She was on her feet before she realized she'd moved, heart hammering, hands curling into fists at her sides. "Miss Morris?" A man's voice, unfamiliar. "Mr. Kim requests your presence for dinner." Thea glanced at the clock. She had been sitting there for 2 hours. The time had simply vanished, eaten by the silence and the soft grey light filtering through the windows. "I'll be right there," she called back. She changed into one of the dresses from the closet, a simple black sheath that fit her like it had been made for her body, because it probably had been. She spent exactly 90 seconds on her makeup, just enough to look professional, and walked out to meet whatever was waiting for her. The penthouse at night was a different creature than it had been during the day. The floor-to-ceiling windows that had shown Seattle's grey skyline now reflected the city's lights, a scattered constellation of gold and white against the darkness. The space felt larger somehow, emptier, like the shadows had moved in to fill the corners the sun had vacated. She found him in the dining room, if a space this vast could be called something so domestic, a table that could have seated 12, set for 2, candles that flickered in some invisible draught, and August Kim at the head of the table, watching her approach with those dark, unreadable eyes. He had changed too. Still in black, but more casual now, the collar of his shirt opened just enough to show a sliver of skin at his throat. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows, and Thea caught herself staring at his forearms, at the lean muscle beneath the skin, before she forced her gaze back to his face. Something flickered in his expression. Amusement, maybe. Or something else entirely. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair at his right, not across from him, where she might have kept some distance, right beside him, close enough to touch. Thea sat. The meal was exquisite. Course after course of food she couldn't name, prepared by a chef she never saw, delivered by staff who appeared and disappeared like ghosts. August ate little and spoke less, and Thea found herself filling the silence with observations about the penthouse, the view, the quality of the wine. Anything to avoid the weight of his attention. But he was watching her. She could feel it even when she wasn't looking, that dark gaze taking her apart piece by piece. "Question game," he said finally, and Thea's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "Excuse me?" "I ask you something. You answer honestly, then you ask me." He lifted his wine glass, studying the color against the candlelight. "Lies are permitted, but I'll know when you're telling them." Thea set down her fork. "And if I don't want to play?" "Then dinner becomes very quiet." He took a sip of wine. "Your choice." She considered refusing, considered pushing back against this game of his, this thinly veiled interrogation disguised as conversation, but information flowed both ways, and she needed to understand him if she was going to survive this. "Fine," she said. "You first." The corner of his mouth lifted. "Where do you feel safest, Miss Morris?" The question hit somewhere she hadn't expected. She thought of Nora's bedroom before, thought of their mother's kitchen, the smell of coffee in the morning, the sound of laughter she hadn't heard in 8 years. But those places didn't exist anymore. Those places had vanished the same night Nora had. "Definitely not here," she said, and the honesty surprised her. August's smile widened by a fraction. Deflection. Humor is the mind's oldest shield. That wasn't a lie. No, he agreed, but it wasn't an answer either. Thea reached for her wine, needing something to do with her hands. "My turn. Why do you refuse to be touched?" The change in him was immediate, subtle but unmistakable, a tightening around his eyes, a stillness that went deeper than his usual control. For a moment, just a moment, she saw something raw beneath the surface, something that looked almost like pain. "That's not a question I answer," he said quietly. "Then the game isn't fair. I never said it was." They stared at each other across the candlelight, and Thea felt something shift between them. Not warmth exactly, not trust, but recognition maybe, the sense that they were both wearing masks, both hiding wounds they didn't want anyone to see. August rose from the table without warning, and Thea's heart lurched. But he didn't leave. Instead, he moved around behind her chair, and suddenly he was close, too close, his breath warm against the back of her neck. Her whole body went on alert, but the wrong kind of alert. Not danger. Hunger. She could feel his breath on her nape, warm and steady and controlled. Just like him. But Thea's control was cracking. A pulse had started between her thighs, embarrassingly strong, and she gripped the edge of the table to keep her knees from trembling. "Your pulse just increased." His voice was right beside her ear, his lips close enough to almost brush her skin. "Why?" "Because you're doing something to me," Thea thought. "Because I haven't felt anything in years, and now you're making me feel everything." "You're too close." Her voice came out wrong, hoarse, barely above a whisper. She could almost hear the smirk in his voice, the quiet confidence. "I haven't touched you." "You don't need to." The admission escaped before she could stop it, and she felt heat flood her cheeks. A silence. She could feel him stiffen behind her, the tension in his muscles, the slight quickening of his breath. He was affected too. The thought sent a new wave of heat flooding through her body. "Interesting," he said, and his voice was thick now, hoarse, like something had broken in it. And then he pulled back, as if physically forcing himself away, and Thea sat there with her hands still trembling on the table. The pulse between her thighs was still beating, wet, aching, impossible. She reached up without thinking and pulled a strand of hair to her lips. That old habit, the one that only surfaced when she was truly rattled. August noticed. His eyes tracked the movement like a predator watching prey. "You've been doing that since you were about 7, he said quietly. "That habit, maybe younger." Thea's blood went cold. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I watch people, Miss Morris. It's what I do." He set down his wineglass and stood. "Friday night. There's an event. You'll attend." "What kind of event?" But he was already walking away, and he didn't turn around. "Friday night," he repeated. "Wear something black." And then he was gone, leaving her alone with the candles and the wine, and the sound of her own racing heart. Thea sat at that table for a long time after he left. The city glittered through the windows, and somewhere out there, Nora was waiting, and Diana was planning, and August Kim was keeping secrets that Thea was supposed to steal. But all she could think about was the heat of his breath on her neck, the way her body had betrayed her, leaning toward him like a flower toward the sun. She was in trouble. Deep, dangerous trouble. Later, in her room, she caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror, and for one disorienting moment, she saw Nora's face instead of her own. The same green eyes, the same stubborn jaw, the same expression of fear mixed with determination that Nora had worn the last night Thea ever saw her. "I'm going to find you," she whispered to the glass. "Whatever it takes." Outside, the rain hammered against the windows, and somewhere in this building, August Kim was planning his next move. How much he knew, how much he suspected, how much of her careful cover had already crumbled. Tomorrow, he would ask questions she couldn't answer. Thea would need better lies and a much stronger heart. Thea woke at 5:47 a.m. on her second day, disoriented and thirsty. She padded out of her room in bare feet, following the dim glow of underwater lights toward what she assumed was the kitchen. She found August instead. He was cutting through the infinity pool with brutal efficiency, his body slicing back and forth in perfect rhythm. Controlled, relentless, powerful. When he finally stopped at her end, arms folded on the edge, water streaming down his face, his breathing was barely elevated. "You're awake early." His eyes traveled over her. Oversized t-shirt, bare legs, sleep-mussed hair. "Kitchen's that way." The question escaped before she could stop it. "Do you live here alone?" He tilted his head, studying her. "Cleaning crew comes 7 to 10. Mrs. Park arrives around 7 in the evening to cook dinner, gone by 8:30. A faint smile tugged at his lips. "That's it." She gestured at the vast space around them, all glass and marble and empty silence. "This place is enormous. I like the quiet." 3 words, but something shifted in his expression. A flicker of something private, something guarded. He pulled himself out of the pool in one fluid motion, and Thea's mouth went dry. Black swim shorts hung low on his hips, water cascading down a body that belonged on a magazine cover. He walked past her toward the gym, close enough that she could smell chlorine and something darker underneath. She didn't turn to watch him go. She didn't trust herself to. But standing in that empty hallway, something clicked. This billionaire chose to live alone. No staff, no constant presence, just silence and solitude. And yet, he'd asked her to stay. Why? An hour later, she found him reading Carl Jung with his morning coffee, so absorbed he didn't look up when she entered. The pages were dog-eared, the spine cracked, not performance. August Kim actually read philosophy, like some disciplined monk in a billionaire's body. The first week passed in a haze of tension and waiting. Every morning, same routine. Thea would dress in the clothes that had appeared in her closet. Designer pieces, perfectly tailored, undoubtedly expensive. But there was always something, a neckline that dipped too low, a skirt with a slit that climbed too high. Blouses made of silk so thin she had to be careful about what she wore underneath. Professional, yes, but with an edge that made her feel exposed. And every morning, August's eyes would travel over her outfit as they walked to the elevator. He never said anything, never touched, just looked, like he was cataloguing every detail for later. The commute to Vantage Tower took 20 minutes in the back of his black Mercedes. Leather interior, tinted windows, a driver who never spoke. August would scroll through tech and finance news on his phone, barely acknowledging her existence. But his cologne would fill the enclosed space, sandalwood at the front, warm amber underneath, and something else she couldn't name, something that whispered of locked doors and secrets worth keeping. It made her want to lean closer. It made her want to press her nose to his neck and breathe him in. The wanting was so sudden, so visceral, that she had to press her nails into her palm to stay still. She would stare out the window and pretend not to notice his reflection watching her. Wednesday morning, her stocking snagged on the car door. A small run, barely visible, climbing up her calf. She didn't notice until she was already seated, smoothing her skirt, and by then it was too late. August noticed. His eyes dropped to her leg, lingered there, and the corner of his mouth curved upward. "Take off the stocking." The words didn't register at first. "Excuse me?" "The run." He nodded toward her calf, his tone matter-of-fact. "Take it off. It looks sloppy." Heat crept up her neck. "I'll fix it at the office." "Take it off now." His voice was calm, unhurried. "Here." The car was moving. The driver's eyes were fixed on the road ahead. And August was watching her with that patient, expectant expression, like he had all the time in the world, like he knew she would comply. Thea's jaw tightened. She could refuse. She should refuse. But something in his gaze told her this was a test, and she wasn't sure what failing would cost her. Slowly, deliberately, she reached under her skirt, lifted her hips off the leather seat just enough to slide the ruined stocking down her thigh, over her knee, past her calf. The fabric whispered against her skin as she pulled it free, and she was acutely aware of August's eyes tracking every movement. When she finished, she held the crumpled stocking in her fist, her cheeks burning. August smiled, something dark and satisfied in his expression. "Elegant and provocative," he murmured, "even when you're furious." Thea met his gaze, refusing to look away. "From a different angle, Mr. Kim, this could be called harassment." Something flickered across his features, amusement maybe, or approval. "Did I make you uncomfortable?" Her voice came out sharper than intended. "You know you did." He tilted his head, studying her reaction like it was data to be analyzed. "I'm particular about details, Miss Morris. No one walks beside me with a snagged stocking." He turned back to his phone, dismissing her as casually as he'd commanded her. "Consider it a professional standard." Thea said nothing, but for the rest of the drive she could feel the cool leather against her bare leg and the ghost of his gaze still burning on her skin. The executive floor of Vantage Tower was a study in controlled intimidation, 52nd floor, private elevator access. And only 2 offices, August's corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and directly across from it, separated by nothing but glass walls, Thea's fishbowl. That's what she called it in her head. A fishbowl. Because that's exactly what it felt like, a glass box where she sat on display, visible from every angle, with nowhere to hide. August's desk faced hers across 20 feet of open space. Every time she looked up, she could see him. Every time she shifted in her chair, she knew he could see her. No secretary on this floor, no assistants bustling in and out. Just the 2 of them, suspended in glass and silence, with the city sprawling far below. Her job, as far as she could tell, was to coordinate his schedule and filter his communications, meeting requests, investor inquiries, media appearances he would inevitably decline. She had access to his calendar, but not his files, his contacts, but not his projects. Enough to be useful, not enough to be dangerous. Or so he thought. Thea spent her mornings sending polite rejections to journalists and her afternoons pretending not to notice that August watched her more than his computer screen. She would feel his gaze like a physical weight, on her hands as she typed, on her neck as she leaned forward, on her legs when she crossed and uncrossed them beneath the glass desk that hid nothing. She started wearing pants on Thursday. August noticed. He didn't say anything, but something like disappointment flickered across his features, and Thea felt a petty surge of satisfaction. Small victories. Every night, dinner with him, every night those dark eyes watching her across the table, asking questions that felt like traps. And every night he kept his distance, close enough to make her skin prickle with awareness, far enough to make her wonder if she'd imagined that first encounter entirely. She hadn't imagined it. Her body remembered. Heat blooming in places she refused to name, breath catching when he reached for his wineglass, the constant, maddening anticipation of a touch that never came. By Thursday, she'd mapped every inch of the penthouse she was allowed to access, doors that wouldn't open, elevators requiring codes she didn't have, and somewhere in this glass tower, the Onyx system hummed away, cataloging secrets she'd been sent to steal. Diana's last message had been clear, timeline accelerating. But every probe hit walls, firewalls that adapted, security that anticipated her moves. August Kim had built a fortress, and Thea was running out of time to crack it. He appeared in her doorway without warning, tall, sharp-eyed, with wire-rimmed glasses that did nothing to soften the cold intelligence in his gaze. August's chief operating officer, his right hand, and clearly his guard dog. He didn't offer his hand, just studied her like a specimen under glass. "Miss Morris, August interviewed 37 candidates over 6 months, rejected all of them." His head tilted, predatory. "Then you walk in and suddenly you're living in his penthouse. What did he see in you?" Thea kept her voice steady, her expression neutral. You'd have to ask him. Something flickered behind those wire-rimmed glasses. I did. He told me to mind my own business. A smile that didn't reach his eyes. Which made you very much my business. He turned to leave, then paused at the threshold, glancing back over his shoulder. I'll be watching, Miss Morris. Welcome to Vantage. And then he was gone, leaving Thea with the certainty that her cover was thinner than she'd hoped. She sank back into her chair, her hand rising to her lips, that old habit from childhood. The one August had somehow known about. Nora would have known what to do, but Nora was gone, had been gone for 8 years, and Thea was alone. She thought about August's eyes, the flash of pain beneath his armor, the question he'd refused to answer. Why don't you let anyone touch you? He was hiding something, and Thea was going to find out what it was. She got back to work. That evening, August found her in the bathroom. Thea had been searching through the medicine cabinet, her head pounding so hard she could barely see straight. The fluorescent light felt like knives in her skull. She didn't hear him approach until his voice came from the doorway, low and certain. You've been avoiding me. She flinched, nearly dropping the bottle of aspirin she'd finally located. I have a headache. I was looking for... He stepped into the bathroom, and suddenly the spacious room felt impossibly small. I can see that. He nodded toward the closed toilet lid, his tone leaving no room for argument. Sit. The word caught her off guard. What? Sit down. Something in his voice made her obey before her brain could object. Thea lowered herself onto the seat, the cold porcelain seeping through her skirt, and watched him move behind her. Her pulse spiked. Her voice came out thin, uncertain. What are you? Be still. 2 words. Quiet, but absolute. His fingers slid into her hair. Gently, he gathered the strands and swept them over one shoulder, exposing the back of her neck. Thea's breath caught. And then he touched her. His fingertips pressed into the base of her skull, firm and deliberate, finding the knots of tension she hadn't even known were there. He worked upward in slow circles, his thumbs tracing the tendons of her neck, his fingers spreading across her scalp with a precision that felt almost clinical. Almost. But the heat of his hands, the way his breath stirred her hair, the impossible intimacy of the position. There was nothing clinical about how her body responded. Goosebumps erupted down her arms. Her nipples tightened beneath her blouse. A shiver ran through her that had nothing to do with cold. His voice dropped lower, close to her ear. You're tense. Let go. She tried to speak. Failed. Tried again, her voice barely a whisper. I thought you didn't touch anyone. His fingers paused for a fraction of a second, then resumed their slow, devastating work. I can touch. The words were quiet, almost gentle. No one touches me. The distinction landed somewhere deep in her chest. She wanted to ask why. Wanted to understand what had made him this way, this man who held the world at arm's length but was now pressing his thumbs into the muscles of her neck like he had every right to be there. She didn't ask. She couldn't. Her thoughts were dissolving under his hands, her headache receding, replaced by something far more dangerous. 2 minutes, maybe 3. It felt like hours. It felt like seconds. Then he leaned down, his lips nearly brushing her ear. Now go to bed. His breath was warm against her skin. You don't need pills. You just need to let go. He stepped back. The sudden absence of his touch felt like a wound. Thea stood on unsteady legs and turned to face him. They were close. Too close. And his eyes were dark, unreadable, fixed on her with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. She swallowed hard, nodded once. And then she was walking, practically fleeing, out of the bathroom, down the hall, into her room. She closed the door and pressed her back against it, her heart slamming against her ribs. What the hell was that? Her headache was gone, But something far worse had taken its place, a wanting so sharp it felt like a blade between her ribs. She pressed her thighs together and tried to breathe. Sleep, when it finally came, was filled with dreams of hands in her hair and whispered commands she was terrified to obey. Friday arrived, wrapped in Seattle's eternal grey. Thea woke early and found a black box waiting on the chair beside her bed. She hadn't heard anyone enter. Someone had stood beside her bed while she slept, and the violation made her skin crawl. Inside the box was a dress. Black silk, so fine it felt like water through her fingers. High neck in front, but the back plunged to just above her spine. The skirt would fall to her ankles, but the slit on the left side would climb to mid-thigh. Beneath the dress, a smaller box containing a mask. White porcelain, shaped in the traditional Korean Hahoetal style, serene, expressionless, revealing nothing. The eyes were hollow curves, the mouth a straight line, beautiful in a way that made her uncomfortable. A note lay at the bottom. Tonight, no names, no past, only truth. Han Night. The event August had refused to explain. Whatever it was, it required masks and silk and secrets told in darkness. Her training screamed at her to refuse, but opportunities like this didn't come twice. If August had secrets, this was where she'd find them. She spent the day in suspended anticipation. At 7 o'clock, she began to prepare. The dress fit like it had been sewn onto her skin. She stared at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The black silk clung to her petite frame, making her look taller, almost dangerous. Her pale skin glowed against the dark fabric. The slit climbed her thigh, like a question she wasn't sure she wanted answered. She left her hair down, auburn waves spilling over her bare back. Her green eyes, Nora's eyes, their mother's eyes, stared back at her, lined with just enough kohl to look mysterious. No jewelry except her mother's small silver earrings. They felt like armor now. At 8 o'clock, a knock at her door. She opened it to find August waiting in the hallway, and for a moment, she forgot how to breathe. He was dressed in black, as always, but tonight the effect was different, sharper, more dangerous. His suit was cut close to his body, emphasizing the lean lines of his shoulders, the narrow taper of his waist. His dark hair was swept back from his face, and in the low light of the hallway, the silver at his temples caught the glow like threads of moonlight. The sharp planes of his face, those high Korean cheekbones, that strong American jaw, looked carved from marble in the shadows. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Those dark, fathomless eyes held something she'd never seen before. Not cold distance, not professional detachment. Hunger. Raw, undisguised hunger that said, "I want to devour you right here in this hallway." But beneath the hunger, control. Iron control that was costing him everything. His jaw was tight, a vein pulsed at his temple. His hands stayed rigidly at his sides, as if moving them would shatter whatever fragile restraint he had left. This wasn't a man keeping his distance. This was a man barely holding himself back from closing it. He didn't speak, didn't compliment her or comment on her appearance. He simply looked. His gaze started at her face, lingered there for a moment that stretched too long, then traveled down, to her neck, to the line of her collarbone, to her breasts hidden beneath the high neckline of black silk. Thea felt them grow heavy under his scrutiny, felt her nipples tighten against the fabric. They must be visible, she thought with a flush of heat, embarrassingly obvious. His eyes continued their descent. Her waist, her hips, the slit in her dress that exposed the length of her leg. He paused there. 1 second. 2. Thea's skin was on fire, as if his gaze was a physical touch tracing every curve. Then his eyes returned to her face, and she saw something in them that made her breath catch, hunger, control, and the dangerous mixture of both. "The mask," he said finally. His voice was rougher than usual, thick, broken somehow. She realized she was still holding it in her hands, clutching the porcelain like a lifeline. Her hands were trembling as she lifted it to her face, and when the porcelain touched her cheeks, she saw August's fingers curl slightly, as if he was holding himself back, as if he wanted to reach for her but couldn't let himself break his own rules. "Come," he said. and turned toward the elevator without waiting for her response. In the elevator, Thea finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind all day. Han Knight. She watched his reflection in the mirrored walls. What does it mean? August didn't look at her. His eyes stayed fixed on the descending numbers, but something shifted in his expression. Han, he said quietly. It's a Korean word. There's no English equivalent. A pause, heavy with something unspoken. It means sorrow that can't be spoken, grief that has no outlet, pain carried so long it becomes part of who you are. The words settled into the space between them like stones dropped into still water. His eyes met hers in the reflection. Tonight, we let it out. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small crystal vial. The liquid inside caught the light, amber, almost golden. Thea watched as he uncapped it, tilting a few drops onto his fingertip. The scent hit her immediately, something dark and floral and ancient, like temples and smoke and forbidden things. What is that? Her voice came out smaller than she intended. A blend I had made, for Han Knight. He turned to face her, and the elevator suddenly felt like a cage. His voice dropped lower, almost reverent. It helps lower the walls we build. Let the Han breathe. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. His voice was barely above a whisper. May I? Thea's heart slammed against her ribs. She should say no. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, but her head was already nodding, a tiny movement she couldn't seem to stop. August raised his hand, his fingertip, still wet with that intoxicating oil, touched the hollow of her throat. She stopped breathing. Slowly, deliberately, he traced a line downward, over her collarbone, along the edge of her neckline, down, down, to the space between her breasts, where the silk finally stopped him. The touch lasted 3 seconds, maybe 4, but it rewired something in her brain. The scent rose from her heated skin, mingling with her own, and suddenly she understood why no other woman at Han Knight would smell like this. He had marked her, claimed her, in a way that was invisible but absolute. He stepped back, capping the vial, his expression unreadable. The elevator was worse after that, so much worse. The mirrored walls multiplied him, August everywhere she looked, dark suit and silver temples, and those eyes that seemed to burn even brighter in the enclosed space. The elixir's scent rose from her skin, mixing with his cologne, sandalwood and leather, until she couldn't tell where she ended and he began. Her body was responding to something beyond her control, something chemical and ancient that the oil had unlocked. Desire, pure, unmistakable desire. This couldn't be happening. She had spent 28 years avoiding exactly this. The wanting, the weakness, the way desire could make you stupid and reckless and blind. After Nora disappeared, after watching what love had done to her sister, the secrecy, the obsession, the way she'd thrown her life away for a man who wouldn't even give his name, Thea had sworn off all of it. Men, touch, the dangerous vulnerability of needing someone. She had never let a man inside her body, never wanted to, had buried that part of herself so deep she'd thought it was dead. August, Kim, was resurrecting it with a single touch. She pressed herself against the far wall, trying to create distance that didn't exist. The elevator hummed around them. The numbers descended. And Thea was acutely aware of every inch of space between their bodies. The air itself felt charged, electric, waiting for something to spark. August's hands had curled into fists at his sides. His knuckles were white. His jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. He was fighting something, she realized. Fighting himself. Fighting 7 years of careful control that was crumbling in this tiny metal box. No one touches me, he had said in the bathroom, and now he's trapped in a box with me, and his hands are shaking. The thought sent liquid heat flooding between her thighs. 50. 49. Thea's breath came too fast. Her nipples were hard against the silk of her dress. She could feel them, aching, obvious. and she prayed he wasn't looking. But he was. She could see him watching her in the mirrored walls, his reflection's eyes traveling down her body with an intensity that felt like physical touch. 48. 47. "You're nervous." His voice was rough, strained, like he was speaking through gravel. Anyone would be nervous. Her own voice came out wrong, breathless, too high. "Not like this." He turned to face her fully, and the air between them crackled. "Not with this particular frequency." She should have denied it, should have laughed, deflected, played the cool operative she was trained to be. Instead, she heard herself say, "Neither are you." August's breath caught. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition, or the particular vulnerability of being seen when you'd spent 7 years hiding. 46, 45. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. The elevator descended through Vantage Tower, and Thea stood pressed against the wall with her heart pounding and her body aching, and August Kim watching her like she was the most dangerous thing he'd ever encountered. The doors opened, and Thea stepped into Han Night, her pulse racing, her body trembling, and the wetness between her legs a shameful secret that was getting harder to ignore with every passing second. The 49th floor was a world that shouldn't have existed. Thea stepped out of the elevator and felt reality shift beneath her feet. The air was thick with incense, heavy with secrets. Blue light bathed everything in an underwater glow, not harsh or cold, but deep, organic, like bioluminescence in an ocean no sunlight had ever touched. Dozens of masked figures drifted through the haze, black silk, white linen, bare shoulders, covered faces. Everyone wore masks like hers, white porcelain, expressionless. She couldn't tell predator from prey. They were all no one here. Somewhere in the darkness, a woman was sobbing, deep, wrenching sounds from somewhere primal. Somewhere else, laughter too sharp, too bright, like glass breaking. And beneath it all, music that wasn't quite music, a low frequency Thea felt in her bones, in the spaces between her thoughts. She turned to August and found him lifting his mask to his face. The transformation was immediate. One moment he was August Kim, dangerous but human, readable. The next a stranger. The porcelain erased his features, left nothing but the shape of him, the coiled stillness she was learning to recognize even in darkness. "What is this place?" Her voice came out small, muffled by her own mask. "This is what Han Night looks like when you set it free." He spoke without turning, his masked face fixed on the crowd. He moved forward, and Thea followed because standing alone seemed infinitely worse. The figures parted for August like water around a stone, some unconscious recognition marking him as their king, even with his face hidden. Behind those masks were the tech elite, the shadow players who ran Silicon Valley, the criminals who laundered money through startups, the politicians who traded votes for data, the predators who thought they were untouchable until August Kim collected their secrets. They all came here, they all bowed to him, and they all pretended they were equals behind their masks. Thea stayed close to his back, close enough to catch his scent through the incense. They passed a man on his knees, tears streaming down his face, decades of rage finally breaking free. 2 women, locked in an embrace so intimate, Thea looked away. A circle of figures swaying to that strange music, their movements hypnotic, ritualistic. One of them reached out as Thea passed, fingers brushing her bare arm, and she flinched so hard she stumbled. August caught her elbow, just for a moment, just long enough to steady her, and then released her before she could register the contact. But her skin burned where he had touched, a small circle of heat that pulsed like a second heartbeat. "Careful," he said, and there was something almost like amusement in his voice. The first time is always overwhelming. They reached a quieter corner of the floor, a space where the blue light was dimmer and the crowd thinner. August gestured for her to sit on a low velvet couch, and she obeyed because her legs were trembling and she wasn't sure how much longer they would hold her. A figure appeared beside them, a server, masked like everyone else, carrying a tray with 2 glasses of something clear and faintly luminescent. Thea stared at the drinks, watching the way the liquid seemed to glow from within. What is that? Han elixir. August took one of the glasses and held it up to the blue light, studying the contents like a scientist examining a specimen. Nothing illegal, nothing that will harm you, but it lowers inhibitions, opens doors that most people keep locked. Thea's throat tightened. I don't want my doors opened. His masked face turned toward her, and even without seeing his expression, she could feel the weight of his gaze. Then you shouldn't have come. She watched him reach into his jacket and produce a small vial, something gold and viscous that caught the light like liquid fire. He let a single drop fall into the elixir, and the liquid shimmered, rippled, then went still. Drink, he said, holding the glass out to her, or leave. Those are your only options. Every instinct Thea had cultivated over years of training screamed at her to refuse. She didn't know what was in that drink, didn't know what that golden drop would do to her, didn't know what kind of trap she was walking into. Diana's voice echoed in her head. Don't get close. Just watch, record, and extract. But Diana wasn't here. Diana had sent her into this lion's den with half-truths and hidden agendas, had used her as bait without bothering to explain what she was bait for. And somewhere beneath the fear and the caution and the years of learned self-protection, something else was stirring. Curiosity, hunger, the desperate need to understand what made August Kim the way he was. She took the glass. The elixir tasted like nothing, like water, like air, like the absence of flavor. But the moment she swallowed, she felt it begin to work. A warmth that started in her belly and spread outward, loosening muscles she hadn't known were tense. A softness at the edges of her vision, not blurring but smoothing somehow, making everything less sharp, less harsh, less defended. And then the walls came down. It happened slowly at first, then all at once, like a dam cracking, and then crumbling. Thea felt her carefully constructed defenses dissolving, felt the layers of armor she'd spent years building simply melting away. Emotions she had locked in boxes, memories she had buried in darkness, truths she had refused to acknowledge. They all came rushing to the surface, demanding to be felt. Nora's face. 22 years old, laughing at something Thea had said, her auburn hair falling across her forehead. Then Nora's room, empty, the bed still unmade, the closet door hanging open. Then the police officer's face, carefully neutral, saying words that didn't make sense. Your sister. We're sorry. No leads at this time. Thea's chest constricted like a fist was closing around her heart. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The masks were everywhere, watching her with their empty eyes, a hand closed around her arm. Male, not August. She turned and found a masked figure leaning over her, breath hot against her neck, alcohol sour beneath the sweetness. His fingers tightened on her wrist. You look lost, little one. Let me help you. Step back. August's voice cut through the music like a blade. She's mine. The man released her instantly, stumbling backward, disappearing into the crowd. August's fingers replaced his on her wrist, warm, firm, possessive. And then she saw it. Just beyond August's shoulder. A woman on her knees before a seated man, her head moving between his thighs, his hands tangled in her hair. The rhythm, the sounds, the raw, animal intimacy of it. Thea's vision tunneled. She had never seen, never been. 28 years of buried wanting crashed against 28 years of walls, and everything shattered at once. Panic seized her body like a vice. Her chest locked. Her lungs refused to expand. She gasped for air, but nothing came. Just short, shallow bursts that made her head spin. Her hands started shaking. Then her legs. Cold sweat broke out along her spine. I can't breathe! I can't breathe! I can't! The elixir amplified everything. The sounds, the scents, the thundering of her own heart. Her fingers clawed at her mask, tearing it off, desperate for air. But without the porcelain shield, every masked face seemed to turn toward her. Hollow eyes, judging, seeing the virgin, seeing the fraud, seeing everything she'd buried for 28 years. The room spun. Her knees gave out. August caught her, wrist first, yanking her upright, then his arm around her waist as she collapsed against him. Her vision was going dark at the edges. Her body was shutting down. But some instinct made her reach for him. Her palm found his chest, felt his heart hammering beneath the expensive fabric, then higher, but her fingers met only cold porcelain. August understood. He released her waist just long enough to tear off his own mask, letting it clatter to the floor. And then her fingers were on his face. Warm skin, sharp jaw, the scratch of stubble she hadn't known was there. She was touching him, the man who let no one touch him. Her voice came out broken, barely a whisper. "I'm not okay." Her fingers trembled against his cheek. "Please, don't leave me here." August went still. Her palm was on his cheek. Her fingers were tracing his jaw, and for the first time in 7 years, the contact didn't make him want to retch. It made him want to pull her closer. He had tried once, a year after Mira. At dinner, a kind woman, her hand reaching for his across the table. His stomach had revolted so violently he'd barely made it to the bathroom. After that, he'd stopped trying, built his walls, made his rules. But Thea's touch felt different. No nausea, no revulsion, just heat, and the terrifying recognition that this woman was the first person since Mira who didn't make his skin crawl. He swept her up, one arm under her knees, the other behind her back, and carried her through the crowd. Thea's head fell against his chest. Her hand stayed pressed over his heart. She wanted him. She wanted him so bad, and this was the strongest thing she'd felt in 8 years. And she couldn't afford it. Couldn't afford this loss of control, this surrender, this terrifying freefall into wanting someone. Her whole life had been built on walls, on keeping people out, on never needing anyone, on making sure no one could hurt her the way Nora's disappearance had hurt her. If she let herself want August Kim, if she let those walls crumble, her mind made the decision her body couldn't. Shut down. The elevator doors closed. Silence swallowed them. The last thing she registered was August's arms tightening around her, his breath ragged against her hair. And even as the darkness took her, her body was still burning for him. She drifted in and out. Warmth. A heartbeat beneath her ear. Sandalwood and leather surrounding her, arms holding her secure. His voice came from somewhere above her, low and steady. "I've got you. You're safe." Her fingers curled into his shirt. She felt him pause, felt the hitch in his breathing. "Don't go," she whispered. A long silence. Then so quiet she might have imagined it. "I'm here." Thea woke to grey morning light and an empty room. She was in her bed, the penthouse bed with its expensive sheets and its lack of locks, but she didn't remember getting here. Didn't remember taking off her dress, though she was wearing a silk robe now, something from her closet she'd never worn before, soft and dark against her skin. Didn't remember taking off her shoes, though they were placed neatly beside the door. The question hit her like cold water. Who had undressed her? Heat rushed to her face. There was no staff at night, no one but August. Had his hands pulled down that zipper, peeled the black silk from her body, seen her in nothing but her underwear? She didn't know if the thought terrified her or thrilled her. Maybe both. Her head ached, not terribly but persistently, a dull throb behind her eyes that reminded her of the elixir, of the music, of the blue light and the masked faces and the feeling of August's fingers around her wrist. She sat up slowly, and something crinkled on the pillow beside her. A note, handwritten. She recognized the handwriting now. August's, the same angular script from the box that had contained her dress. "Now you know what Han feels like. The question is, what are you hiding?" Thea stared at the words until they blurred. Her throat was tight, her chest hollow, her mind still reeling from everything that had happened. She had lost control last night, had shown weakness, vulnerability, the soft underbelly she spent her entire life protecting, had clung to him like a child afraid of the dark. And he had stayed, had carried her, had watched over her until morning. She thought about Diana, about the mission, about the careful lies she was supposed to be maintaining. She thought about Onyx and the secrets she was supposed to steal. She thought about James Fox watching her, waiting for her to slip up. But mostly, she thought about the way August's hand had felt around her wrist, the way his voice had sounded when he said, "She's mine," the way he had looked at her in the doorway, before the elevator, before everything fell apart, like she was something he wanted to devour and protect in equal measure. She reached up and pulled a strand of hair to her lips. That old habit, the one he had somehow known, came from childhood. She had touched him. The man who let no one touch him had let her hands on his face, had let her fingers trace his jaw, had carried her through the darkness without flinching away. And she didn't know what that meant, but she knew it changed everything. The day after Han night, August Kim vanished. Not literally, of course. Thea knew he was somewhere in the building, knew his empire didn't run itself, knew a man like him didn't simply disappear. But when she finally forced herself out of bed, her head still aching and her memories still fragmented, the penthouse was empty. No breakfast waiting, no assistant with a schedule, no watchful gaze tracking her from across the room. Just silence, and the note on her pillow, and the ghost of his hands still burning on her skin. She found James Fox in the lobby, his expression carefully neutral in a way that told her nothing and everything at once. "Mr. Kim is out today," he said before she could ask. "Business in Portland. He'll return tomorrow evening." Thea nodded, not trusting her voice. She could feel James studying her, cataloguing the shadows under her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands, the way she kept reaching up to touch her wrist where August had held her. She dropped her hand immediately, but the damage was done. James had seen. "Rough night?" he asked, and there was something sharp beneath the casual tone. "I'm fine." "Of course you are." He turned to leave, then paused. "Miss Morris, a word of advice." He didn't look at her when he spoke. "Whatever happened at Han night, forget it. August Kim doesn't form attachments. He collects people, uses them, discards them when they're no longer useful." Now he did turn, and his eyes behind those wire-rimmed glasses were cold. "Don't make the mistake of thinking you're different." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her alone with the weight of his warning and the lingering sensation of August's pulse against her fingertips. Saturday morning, Thea did something she hadn't done in years. She stopped. Standing on the penthouse balcony with coffee, watching Seattle rain paint the city grey, she thought about Nora. Gentle memories this time, laughter, burnt pancakes, braided hair before school. A tear slid down her cheek. She let it fall. Then she wiped her face and let the agent take over. 1 week. She had been here 1 week. And what did she have? A confusing attraction to her target, a panic attack at a sex party, fragmented memories of being carried through darkness. Diana would be furious. Diana was probably already furious. But Thea hadn't been idle. She had been watching, cataloguing, building a map inside her head. The elevator required different codes for different floors. She had memorized James's fingers 3 days ago when he'd punched in the sequence. The security cameras cycled every 47 seconds with a 3-second blind spot during the transition. The cleaning crew came at 7 a.m. and left at 10, entering through the service elevator that required a key card, but no code. And then there was floor 47. She had noticed it her first day. The elevator panel had buttons for every floor except 47. No marking, no gap. Just 46, then 48, as if that floor didn't exist. But buildings didn't skip floors for no reason, and a man who collected secrets at Han night needed somewhere to store them. August was in Portland. The penthouse was empty. If she was ever going to find Onyx, tonight was her chance. By midnight Saturday, Thea was inside Vantage Tower's system, remotely, through the laptop she'd hidden in her suitcase, the one August's people hadn't found. 3 hours of hunting through walls that seemed built specifically to keep her out, and then finally a crack small enough to slip through. What she found made her blood run cold. Mira Cole. Missing. 7 years. A photograph filled the screen, a woman with warm brown eyes and auburn hair, beautiful in the soft way that made you want to trust her immediately. Mira Cole, age at disappearance 27, fiancée of A. Kim. Engagement announced March 2017. Disappearance June 2017. No body recovered. Case cold. Thea stared at the photograph until her eyes burned. August Kim had been engaged once, had loved someone enough to promise them forever, and then that someone had vanished without a trace. Just like Nora, just like all the people who disappeared and left nothing behind but questions. A fiancé, 7 years missing, and he had never mentioned her, not once. Thea slammed the laptop shut with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, her mind racing with questions she didn't have answers for. Why had Diana sent her here without telling her this? What connection did August's missing fiancé have to Onyx, to this mission, to whatever Diana was really hunting? She knew with sudden certainty that Diana had known about Mira all along. Sunday morning, she sent her report through the secret channel, messages hidden inside photographs on a website only they knew about, and Diana's response came fast. Mira Cole not relevant, focus on Onyx. Thea pushed back, requesting background on the missing woman. The reply was colder this time. Negative. Do not pursue. Diana was hiding something, and Thea was going to find out what it was. August returned Sunday evening, and something between them had shifted. Thea felt it the moment he walked through the penthouse door, a tension in the air that hadn't been there before, a charge that made her skin prickle and her breath catch. He looked tired, she noticed. Not physically exhausted, but worn in some deeper way, like the trip to Portland had cost him something he couldn't afford to lose. Their eyes met across the living room, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, thick with everything that had happened on Han night, everything they hadn't said, everything they both knew but couldn't acknowledge. Then August broke the spell. Come with me. Not a question, not a request, just words, dropped into the silence like stones into still water, and Thea found herself following without asking where or why. He led her to a room she hadn't seen before, a library tucked behind the main living space, hidden behind a door she had assumed was a closet. The space was warm in a way the rest of the penthouse wasn't, all dark wood and leather and shelves that climbed toward the ceiling, stuffed with books that looked like they had actually been read. A fireplace crackled in one corner, casting dancing shadows across the walls. August gestured to a chair near the fire, and Thea lowered herself into it, while he remained standing, studying the spines of the books like they held answers he wasn't sure he wanted. "The shelf behind you," he said finally, his voice low in the firelit room. "Red spine, page 212. Thea found it, a thick volume bound in crimson leather, the Red Book by Carl Jung, and opened to the page he'd marked, where a passage had been underlined in faded pencil. August settled into the chair across from her, the firelight carving deep shadows into his face, and when he spoke, the single word carried more weight than it should have. "Read." Thea cleared her throat and began, her voice wavering slightly on the unfamiliar words. "The shadow is everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves, the desires we bury, the needs we deny, the hunger we pretend does not exist." She felt August's eyes on her, watching, waiting. We run from our shadow, believing we can escape it, but the shadow only grows stronger in darkness. It waits, it watches, and eventually it demands to be seen. The words felt too close, too personal, like Jung had reached across a century and written them specifically for her. "Continue," August said softly, and she did. "The shadow is not our enemy, it is our truth, and the only way to become whole is to turn and face what we have spent our lives running from, to acknowledge the wanting, to accept the hunger, to embrace the parts of ourselves we have locked away in shame." The silence that followed was thick enough to touch, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire and the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. When she looked up, August was watching her with an intensity that made her skin burn, and he leaned forward until she could smell sandalwood and leather, and something darker underneath. "What's your shadow, Thea?" His voice was barely a whisper, intimate and relentless. "What are you running from?" The question hit her like a blow to the chest, and she thought about 28 years of walls, about Nora, about the wetness between her thighs every time August looked at her, the wanting she had spent her whole life denying. "Everyone has one," he continued, his dark eyes never leaving hers. "The thing they bury deepest, the desire they're most ashamed of." Something raw flickered across his features, there and gone. "I know mine. I've lived with it for 7 years. The fire crackled, and the shadows danced across the walls, and August Kim sat 3 feet away from her, asking questions no one had ever dared to ask. "I think you know yours too," he said quietly, each word landing like a stone. "I think you've been running from it your whole life. And I think that's why you're afraid of me." She should have denied it, should have laughed and deflected and played the professional she was supposed to be, but instead she heard herself whisper, "I'm not afraid of you." "No." His voice dropped lower still, rough and certain. "You're afraid of what you want from me." The words hung between them like smoke, dangerous and true, and neither of them moved to break the spell. The fire had burned low by the time August spoke again, the room wrapped around them like a cocoon of amber shadows and unspoken truths, his eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her heart stutter. "Why?" he said softly. "Are you afraid of being touched, Thea?" The question landed like a second blow, and she felt her walls trembling. But something stopped her from rebuilding them. Maybe the intimacy of this moment, maybe the memory of Han Knight and his hands carrying her through darkness. Maybe she was just tired of lying. A laugh escaped her, sharp and bitter before she could stop it. "I think you're confusing me with yourself, Mr. Kim." "I'm not afraid," she said, but the words came out wrong, defensive, revealing. "You're the one with rules about touch. You're the one who flinches when someone gets too close. You're the one who built walls so high no one can climb them." She leaned forward, matching his intensity. "So why are you asking me about my shadows when you won't even look at your own?" August leaned forward with a smirk on his mouth, the firelight catching the silver at his temples. "Your body says otherwise." His voice was low, gentle, relentless. "When I stepped close to you at dinner, your breath stopped. When I touched your wrist at Han Night, your nails dug into my skin like you were drowning. When I carried you to your room, you held on to me like I was the only solid thing in the world." He paused, and something raw flickered across his features. "I know the signs, Thea, because I recognize them in myself." Thea's throat tightened, pressure building behind her eyes, hot and unwelcome. She reached up without thinking and pulled a strand of hair to her lips. That old habit. The one he had already seen, already catalogued, already understood. "My turn," she managed, her voice rough. "Why do you refuse to be touched?" Silence. The fire crackled. Somewhere outside, rain began to fall, a soft percussion against the windows. August stood and moved to the window, his back to her, his silhouette sharp against the glow of the city lights. When he spoke, his voice was different. Stripped, like he was reaching into some locked room inside himself and dragging the words out by force. "Because the last person I let touch me disappeared." Thea didn't move, didn't breathe. Her name was Mira. The words came slowly, each one a wound. 7 years ago. We were going to get married. A pause, long and heavy. I was different then. I touched people, shook hands, held her whenever she needed holding. I was human, I suppose. He turned to face her, and Thea saw something she had never seen in August Kim before. Pain. Raw, unguarded, devastating. One day she was here. The next, she was gone. No note, no body, no explanation. His jaw tightened. I've been looking ever since. 7 years. Every resource I have, every contact, every system, every favor I've ever been owed. Nothing. Thea's chest ached. She wanted to go to him, wanted to put her hand on his arm, wanted to offer some comfort for a wound she understood better than he could possibly know. But she stayed frozen in her chair, afraid that any movement would shatter this moment, would send him back behind his walls. After she disappeared, August continued, I couldn't bear to be touched. Every hand that reached for me felt like a reminder of hers. Every contact was an absence, so I stopped, built rules around myself, became someone who didn't need anyone. His eyes found hers, dark and searching. Until you. The words hung in the air between them, and Thea felt her heart pounding, felt heat crawling up her neck, felt every defense she had ever built trembling on the edge of collapse. I had a sister, she heard herself say, the words escaping before she could stop them. Nora. She was 4 years older than me, my best friend, my protector. Her voice cracked, but she pressed on anyway. 8 years ago, she was seeing someone, an older man, and she wouldn't tell me his name, wouldn't tell anyone. She just glowed, like she had found something precious. She stood on shaking legs and moved toward August anyway, drawn by something stronger than fear. One morning, she was gone, just like your mirror. No note, no body, nothing. The police found nothing and her case went cold in 6 months. She stopped a few feet from him, close enough to see the firelight reflected in his eyes. I've been looking ever since. 8 years. That's why I joined G-Tech. That's why I do what I do, because somewhere out there, my sister is waiting, and I will tear down every wall in the world to find her. The rain fell harder now, streaking down the windows like tears. August reached out, slowly, carefully, giving her time to pull away, and touched her face, just his fingertips against her cheek, light as a breath. Thea's eyes fluttered closed before she could stop them, a response her body no longer let her control, because his touch was warm and gentle and completely devastating. His fingers traced from her cheek to her jaw, agonizingly slowly, and Thea's lips parted as her breath trembled out, while she watched August's eyes darken from deep brown to almost black. Thea. He said her name like it was a prayer and a plea combined, 7 years of hunger compressed into a single syllable. His thumb brushed the corner of her lower lip and rested there, and when Thea licked her lips without thinking, touching the tip of his finger, August's entire body went rigid. She could see his control shattering. 7 years, he whispered, his voice raw. 7 years and I haven't wanted anyone. Haven't felt this. He swallowed hard before continuing. What are you? Thea raised her hand and caught his, pressing it against her cheek, holding on to this man who hadn't been touched by anyone in 7 years, and she felt him tremble like a leaf beneath her fingers. Her knees went weak, and she could feel the wetness between her thighs, her body responding to his proximity with a hunger she couldn't control, 8 years of loneliness dissolving in a single touch. Whatever you are, she whispered back, because I haven't felt anything in 8 years either. Not until you. She couldn't finish the rest of what she wanted to say, because August was looking at her with hunger and fear and desperation mixed together, and Thea wanted nothing in the world except for this man to kiss her. 7 years, he said softly, his voice hoarse. 8 years. 2 women who vanished without a trace. Thea's heart stopped as the moment shifted from desire to something deeper, something more terrifying. What are you saying? August's eyes searched hers, and in them she saw the same question that was forming in her own mind, the same impossible connection, the same terrifying hope. What if they're connected, Thea? What if Mira and Nora? What if they're part of the same story? Thea couldn't speak, couldn't think. The world had tilted on its axis, and nothing would ever be the same again. They started digging that same night. August led her to his private office, a space she had never been allowed to enter before, and this was the heart of Onyx, she realized, not the server room, but here, in the place where August Kim actually lived. He sat down, entered a series of commands that made her trained eyes widen with recognition, and opened a door that should have been impossible to open. Onyx unfolded across the screens like a living thing, and it was exactly what Diana had sent her to steal. And August was showing it to her freely. He pulled up Mira's file first, the same photograph Thea had seen before, but now surrounded by data she hadn't been able to access. Then he opened another search and typed a name that made Thea's breath catch. Nora Morris. August arranged the two files side by side, and Thea saw it immediately. The dates were different. Mira had vanished in June, Nora the previous August, but the pattern was the same. Both women had been in Seattle. Both had been seeing someone they refused to name. Both had simply disappeared, leaving behind nothing but questions and grief. And there was something else, a connection that made Thea's blood run cold. Both women had applied to the same company in the months before they vanished, a security consulting firm that had gone bankrupt 3 years after Nora disappeared, its records sealed, its employees scattered. Shen Enterprises. August's hands had gone still on the keyboard, and when Thea looked at his face, she saw something she had never seen there before. Not pain, not vulnerability, but rage, cold and controlled and deadly. "Victor Shen," he said, and the name came out like a curse. August told her about Victor in fragments, his voice tight with the effort of keeping his emotions in check. They had been partners once, back when Vantage was young and August was still naive enough to trust. Victor had handled the international side of the business, and then August had discovered what Victor was really doing: the shell companies, the money laundering, the connections to organizations that traded in human lives like commodities. He had cut Victor out immediately, had used every resource he had to destroy the man's reputation and dismantle his network, and Victor had fled the country. "I thought I'd destroyed him," August continued, his voice hollow, "but I only destroyed the public face. The trafficking operation must have continued underground, and Mira was always curious, always digging. If she found evidence that Victor's network was still active..." He looked at Thea, and the anguish in his eyes was almost unbearable. "He took her to punish me and to protect himself, and your sister might have stumbled onto the same trail. Another investigator, another threat, another person who knew too much." Thea couldn't speak, her throat closed up and her chest constricted, her mind spinning with implications she couldn't fully process. 8 years she had been searching for Nora, and the answer might have been here all along, buried in the secrets of a man she had been sent to destroy. She didn't fall apart. She had spent too many years learning not to. "What do we do now?" she asked, and her voice came out steadier than she expected. August turned back to the screens, his jaw set with determination. "We find him. We find Victor Shen, and we make him tell us what he did with them." They worked through that night and into the next day, side by side. Their earlier tension transformed into something that felt almost like partnership. He taught her the intricacies of Onyx, trusted her with access that would have made Diana weep with joy, and she used every skill she had ever learned to help him trace the ghost of Victor Shen. They ate meals together without speaking, too focused to waste time on conversation, and they fell asleep in chairs, waking to find blankets draped over their shoulders that neither of them remembered placing there. And somewhere in those sleepless hours, Thea realized she had stopped thinking of August as her target. Late the second night, August's hand brushed hers as they both reached for the same file, and neither of them pulled away. They sat like that for a long moment, frozen, the air between them charged with something unspoken. Then the screen flashed red. Security alert. Someone else was in the system. "That's not me," Thea said immediately. August's jaw tightened. "I know. Someone accessed the server room 2 minutes ago." They looked at each other, and Thea saw her own dread reflected in his eyes. Someone else was hunting the same secrets. The next morning, James Fox found her. Thea was alone in August's private office, running a trace on one of Victor's old financial accounts, when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, expecting August, and found James instead. He stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, his expression carved from ice, and when he spoke his voice was soft, but there was nothing gentle in it. "Miss Morris? Working late?" Thea's heart rate spiked, but she kept her face calm. "Mr. Kim asked me to run some searches," she said, proud of how steady her voice came out. James tilted his head like a predator catching a scent, and his next words made her blood run cold. "Did he? Because I just spoke to Mr. Kim, and he didn't mention anything about authorizing you for system access." Cold sweat broke out along her spine as she realized the lie had been too easy to check. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, and his voice dropped to something almost dangerous. "What are you really doing here, Miss Morris? Who sent you? What do you want?" August's voice cut through the tension from the doorway. "She's with me." Both Thea and James turned to face him, and he stood there like he had materialized from shadow, his shoulders filling the frame, his presence commanding the room without effort. James straightened, his posture shifting from predator to subordinate, though his voice remained clipped. "Sir, I found her accessing restricted systems without authorization. I believe she may be—" August cut him off, and the words landed like stones in still water. "I know exactly what she is, James." Thea felt her heart stop, felt the blood drain from her face, felt every lie she had told crumbling around her. August stepped into the room, moving past James without acknowledging him, and didn't stop until he was standing directly in front of Thea. He looked down at her with that unreadable gaze, and she saw no anger there, no betrayal, just a calm, almost resigned certainty that somehow hurt worse than rage. His voice dropped lower, almost intimate despite the accusation. "You're not who you say you are, Thea Morris. Or should I say Agent Morris? GTEC, Global Tech and Ethics Commission, sent to infiltrate my company and steal Onyx." James made a sharp exhale of satisfaction behind them, but August held up a hand without looking at him, his command absolute. "Leave us!" James's voice was tight with protest. "Sir, I really think—" August's tone dropped 10 degrees, brooking no argument. "Leave. Us." James hesitated for a long moment before turning and walking out, and the door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. They were alone. Thea's voice came out rough, scraped raw by fear. "How long have you known?" August held her gaze with that terrible, knowing stillness. "I suspected from the moment you walked into my office." He paused, and something flickered across his features, not triumph, but something closer to regret. "Your cover was good, better than most, but small things didn't add up. The way you held yourself, too controlled, too aware of your surroundings. The way you asked questions that weren't quite right for a personal assistant. The way you watched me when you thought I wasn't looking." Thea felt something inside her crack, some last desperate hope that she could still salvage this, still maintain some fragment of her cover. "Suspicion isn't the same as certainty," she managed. "So when did you know for sure?" "Han night." His voice roughened on the words. "When I touched you, when I carried you through the dark, and you didn't flinch away from me like everyone else does. When you held onto my shirt like you trusted me to keep you safe." His jaw tightened. "That's when I knew something was wrong with my calculations. An agent sent to destroy me shouldn't have felt like coming home." He tilted his head slightly, that familiar gesture of dissection. "I've spent 7 years learning to see through lies, Thea. And you were lying from the first word. But somewhere between the lies, there was something real. Something that made me want to take the risk." She should have denied it, should have maintained her cover until the very end, the way she had been trained, but something in his face, something tired and knowing and almost sad, made the denials stick in her throat. "Then why?" she whispered. "Why let me stay? Why show me Onyx? Why tell me about Mira?" The questions tumbled out of her, desperate and raw, and she watched something shift in August's expression, a softening at the edges, a crack in that impenetrable armor. "Because I was gambling that whatever Diana sent you for, you might help me find something I've been looking for far longer." His eyes held hers. "And because touching you was the first thing that felt right in 7 years. I wasn't ready to let go of that, even if it destroyed me. The confession hit Thea like a physical blow. He hadn't been certain. He had been hoping, risking, trusting something he couldn't explain. Just like she had. "Diana," she said, and the name tasted different now. "You mentioned Diana. How do you know?" "Diana Hayes." He said the name like it tasted bitter, like something rotten he'd been forced to hold in his mouth. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. "She's been watching me for years, sending agents, building cases, trying to find evidence that doesn't exist." He paused, and his gaze grew distant, fixed on something Thea couldn't see. "When you showed up with a cover story that was almost perfect, I assumed you were just another attempt." His focus returned to her face, sharper now, more intent. "But then you asked about Mira, and I realized this was personal for Diana, more personal than I understood." Thea's mind was spinning. Diana had known about Mira. Diana had sent her specifically because of Mira, but why? What connection did Diana have to August's missing fiancé? The questions tangled in her head, knotting tighter with each passing second. "I don't understand," she said, and she hated how lost she sounded, how small. August studied her for a moment, his gaze tracing the confusion written across her features. Then he moved closer, and suddenly he was too close, close enough that his familiar scent wrapped around her, close enough that she could see the silver threads at his temples and the shadows under his eyes. "Neither do I. Not yet." His voice dropped lower, more intimate, as if the words were meant only for her. "But I know this much. You came here to destroy me, and instead you helped me find the first real lead on Mira in 7 years." His hand rose slowly, giving her time to pull away, and came to rest against her cheek. His palm was warm, his fingers gentle, and the contact sent electricity racing through her entire body. "So, the question is," he said softly, his breath warm against her skin, "what happens now?" Thea couldn't think, couldn't process, but her body could feel. God, could it feel? His hand on her face, his eyes searching hers. And she was so tired of lying, so tired of running, so tired of being alone. "I don't know," she admitted, and the honesty felt like relief. "I want to touch you," he said, and his voice, God, his voice, thick, broken, cracked from 7 years of drought. His hands cupped her face, cradling her like she was made of glass. "Do you know how long it's been since I wanted this? Since I wanted anything?" Thea's breath stopped. Heat exploded in her belly, flooding downward, pooling between her thighs. Her hands found his chest, and she could feel his heart racing, fast, erratic, matching hers. "August?" His name tumbled from her lips like a prayer. "I won't." He moved closer, his breath ghosting across her lips, warm, unsteady, carrying the scent of sandalwood and desire. The space between their mouths was measured in millimeters now, in heartbeats, in the trembling restraint of a man who had denied himself for 7 years. "Not until you ask me to." So close. She could see the shape of his lips, the fullness of the lower, the sharp line of the upper. She could imagine how they would feel against hers. Hot, demanding, fierce enough to melt 8 years of ice. Her body made the decision before her mind could. Her fingers clenched his shirt, her chin lifted, her eyes closed, and just as her lips were about to touch his, the alarm exploded. Red light, screaming sirens, and August wrenching himself away, a physical wound, a knife pulled from flesh, sudden and merciless. Thea stood there, lips parted, body still reaching for him, and felt the emptiness like an ache in every cell. No, no. They had been so close. So. But the moment was gone, lost, and with it, her sanity had returned. But her body was still burning, still wanting, still calling for him. Security breach detected. System room. Unauthorized access. August was moving before the announcement finished, pulling away so abruptly that she stumbled. He sprinted toward the main terminal, his fingers flying across the keyboard. She watched as window after window opened, each one showing a different piece of the disaster unfolding around them. Someone was in the system. Someone who wasn't Thea. "That's not possible," August muttered. His jaw was tight, tendons standing out in his neck. "No one else has access. No one else could—" He stopped, stared at the screen. When he turned to look at Thea, his face was carved from stone. "The files," he said. "Mira and Nora. Someone copied them." Thea's blood went cold. She moved to stand beside him, her trained mind trying to make sense of what she was seeing. "What? Who?" August pulled up another trace, another impossible answer. And when the data resolved, Thea felt the ground drop out from under her. A G-Tech signature, but not her code, not her access. Diana had sent someone else. "She was using you." August's voice was hollow with understanding. He turned to face her, and something flickered in those depths. Sympathy, maybe, or shared grief, or the recognition of a fellow survivor. "Diana, you were never the real agent. You were just the distraction." Thea stood frozen, her voice locked somewhere deep in her chest, her mind spinning with implications that threatened to drown her. Everything she had believed, everything she had sacrificed, it was all a lie. Diana had played her from the beginning. She thought of all the nights she had spent planning this infiltration, all the lies she had told herself about serving a greater good, all the times she had pushed down her growing feelings for August because the mission came first. And none of it had mattered. None of it had been real. "We have to find them," Thea said, and her voice came out stronger than she felt. Something was hardening inside her now, something cold and determined. Diana had used her. Diana had lied to her. And Diana had just stolen the only leads to finding Nora. Whoever did this, whatever Diana is planning, we have to stop her. August looked at her for a long moment, that penetrating gaze searching her face for something, truth, maybe, or loyalty, or the answer to a question he hadn't asked yet. The red emergency lights cast strange shadows across his features, making him look older, more dangerous, more like the man the world thought he was. Then something in his expression softened. Just a fraction. Just enough. "Together," he said. And despite everything, despite the lies and the betrayal and the alarm still screaming around them, Thea felt something shift into place. Something that felt dangerously like hope. The security breach changed everything. Thea spent the next 48 hours in a state of suspended fury, her mind racing through every interaction she'd ever had with Diana Hayes, searching for the signs she should have seen. She had been played from the very beginning, and she had been nothing but a pawn in someone else's game. August worked beside her in grim silence, tracing the intrusion back through layers of encryption and misdirection. The breach had originated from a G-Tech secure server with director-level access codes, and the timing was too perfect to be coincidence. The intruder had waited until they were too wrapped up in each other to notice the knife sliding into their backs. On the morning of the third day, August found what they were looking for. He pulled up a communication log, encrypted but not encrypted enough, and Thea watched as Diana's orders unfolded across the screen. Instructions to someone called ASSET7 to infiltrate Vantage and copy the Mira and Nora files, and then, at the bottom of the log, a line that made Thea's blood turn to ice. Primary objective remains unchanged. Kim must be destroyed. He took my daughter. He will pay. Thea read the words 3 times, certain she was misunderstanding. My daughter, Diana Hayes, Mira Cole. Different surnames. That's why she had never made the connection. She turned to August and found him already watching her with something that looked almost like pity. You didn't know, he said quietly, and it wasn't a question. Thea shook her head, not trusting her voice as everything she thought she understood about Diana crumbled around her. Diana is Mira's mother. August's voice was flat, controlled, but she could hear the strain beneath it. Different names. Mira used her father's surname after the divorce. But the same blood, the same grief. She's been hunting me for 7 years because she believes I killed her daughter. The words landed like hammer blows. But you didn't, she heard herself say. You loved Mira. You've been searching for her. Diana doesn't know that. August turned back to the screen, his jaw tight. All she knows is that her daughter was engaged to me. And then her daughter disappeared. She spent 7 years building a case, looking for evidence, waiting for the moment when she could finally make me pay. His hands curled into fists on the keyboard. And when she couldn't find evidence, she decided to manufacture it. That's what you were for, Thea. You were supposed to get close to me, find something incriminating or plant something if you had to. He looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was almost unbearable. Diana was going to use you to destroy me one way or another. Thea felt sick as she thought about all the reports she had sent Diana, all the details about August's life that she had unknowingly helped build the case against an innocent man. I didn't know, she whispered. Diana told me you were dangerous, that Onyx was a threat. She never mentioned Mira, never told me there was a personal connection. Of course she didn't. August's voice was bitter, but not toward her. If you knew the truth, you might have started asking questions Diana didn't want answered. He stood abruptly and moved to the window, his silhouette sharp against the grey Seattle morning. 7 years. I've spent 7 years looking for Mira, wondering what happened to her, whether she's alive, whether I could have saved her. And this whole time, her own mother has been trying to destroy me instead of helping me find her. Thea crossed the room slowly and stood beside him, giving him time to pull away, but he didn't move. I'm sorry, she said, and the words came from somewhere deep that had nothing to do with missions or covers. August, I'm so sorry. He didn't respond, and the silence stretched between them, heavy with everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. Diana's call came that afternoon. Thea was alone in her room when the burner phone buzzed, the one Diana had given her for emergencies, hidden in her suitcase, never used until now. She answered with her heart pounding. Diana's voice was crisp and cold. You've been quiet. I expected a report 2 days ago. There have been complications. So I've heard. My other asset reports that Kim has brought you into his inner circle. Diana's voice dropped to something dangerous. I've seen the security footage, Thea. The way he looks at you, the way you look at him. Tell me I'm not going to have a problem. Thea closed her eyes, thinking about August's hands on her face, about the almost kiss in his office. You don't have a problem, she said, and the lie tasted like ash. Diana's voice softened into that maternal tone she used when she wanted something, saying she needed Thea to finish this, that Kim had killed Mira, and she just needed proof. What if you're wrong? The words slipped out before Thea could stop them. What if Mira is still out there somewhere? The silence that followed was long and dangerous, and then Diana laughed, a terrible sound, broken and bitter. You've fallen for him. Diana's voice turned sharp and cruel. 7 years I've waited, and now my best agent has spread her legs for the man who murdered my daughter. Diana, 48 hours. Deliver something I can use, or I'll handle this myself. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And if you warn him, I will destroy you both. The line went dead. Thea sat with the phone clutched in her shaking hands, knowing what she had to do. She had to tell August everything before Diana made good on her promise. She found him in the library, sitting in the same chair where she had read to him from Jung's Red Book, his face lit by the dying glow of the fireplace. He looked up when she entered, and something flickered across his features. Hope, maybe, or fear, or some complicated mixture of both. Diana called, Thea said without preamble, closing the door behind her. She has a burner phone for emergencies. She's never used it until now. She gave me 48 hours to destroy you. August's expression didn't change as he waited for her to continue. She knows something changed between us. She said she's seen the security footage, the way we look at each other. Thea's voice cracked. She threatened to destroy us both if I warn you. She was crying now, she realized, tears streaming down her cheeks. I came here to destroy you, she whispered, and instead I found... She couldn't finish, couldn't put words to the impossible thing growing in her chest. August rose from his chair slowly, giving her time to run, but she didn't move. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the firelight reflected in his eyes, close enough that his scent surrounded her. He told her then, in a voice that carried the weight of 7 years of grief, that Diana was wrong about him. He had loved Mira, would have died for her. When she disappeared, he had built walls so high no one could climb them. His hand rose, hovering near her face but not quite touching. And then Thea had walked into his office, he continued, with her terrible lies and her hidden grief and her eyes that reminded him of everything he'd been running from. And he had known from the first moment that she was going to break through every wall he'd built. Thea reached up and caught his hand, pressing it against her cheek, and she felt him tremble. This man who hadn't let anyone touch him in 7 years, shaking because her skin was against his. I believe you, she said, and the words were a promise. August, I believe you. He exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to release years of tension. His thumb traced along her cheekbone, wiping away tears. You shouldn't trust anyone, he murmured. Least of all me. Thea stepped closer, her hands finding his chest, feeling the rapid pound of his heart. She looked up at him, this broken, beautiful, impossible man, and made a choice. I trust you, she said, and then she rose onto her toes and pressed her lips to his. The first contact was soft and tentative, a question asked in the space between breaths, and his lips were warm against hers, slightly rough, tasting like whiskey and grief and 7 years of loneliness. Then something shifted. August made a sound from deep in his throat, half groan, half sob, and his arms came around her, pulling her against him with a desperation that stole her breath. The kiss deepened and turned hungry, turned into something that felt like drowning and flying at the same time. His hands tangled in her hair while her fingers clawed at the fabric of his shirt, and the world narrowed to just this, his mouth on hers, his body pressed against hers, the impossible heat building between them. His tongue pressed against her lips, and Thea opened for him, desperately and willingly, with 8 years of pent-up need. She tasted him, whiskey and darkness, and something raw and masculine and completely addicting. August pushed her against the wall, hard and demanding, and Thea moaned, a real moan, deep and broken and embarrassingly loud. But she didn't care, because his hips were pressed against hers, and she could feel him, hard and throbbing, straining against the fabric of his trousers. He groaned her name into her lips. Thea. Don't stop, she whispered, her hand sliding down his back toward his belt. Please don't stop. But he did stop, pulling himself back with their foreheads pressed together, both of them gasping for air. Thea's lips were swollen, and her heart was pounding, and between her legs she was wetter than she had been in 8 years. Her name came out broken from his lips, and she had never heard anything more beautiful. Thea. I'm here, she whispered back. I'm not going anywhere. They stood, wrapped in each other, bodies still pressed close, still aching, still wanting, and for the first time in 7 years, August Kim let himself be held. Thea knew that tonight had changed everything. Then August lifted her, one arm beneath her knees, the other cradling her back, and carried her through the penthouse like she weighed nothing at all. Thea buried her face in his neck, breathing him in, feeling the steady thrum of his pulse against her lips. His bedroom was dark and warm, the city lights filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows, and when he laid her on the bed, she pulled him down with her. Their mouths found each other again, slower this time, but no less hungry, and Thea arched into him as his weight pressed her into the mattress. His hand slid beneath her shirt, fingers tracing fire across her ribs, and she gasped into his mouth when his palm found her breast. Her nipple hardened instantly against his touch, and August groaned, a sound of pure, desperate need that made her entire body clench with want. Her name came out broken from his lips, reverent. "Thea, I want you. God, I want you so much it's killing me." She reached for his belt, her fingers trembling with 8 years of hunger. "Then have me." But his hand caught hers, stilling her movements, and when she looked up at him, she saw something painful flickering in his eyes. "I can't." The words seemed to cost him everything. "Not yet. My mind is... There's too much noise in my head, Thea. Too many ghosts." She understood then. Understood what he wasn't saying. Mira. 7 years of searching. 7 years of not knowing. 7 years of guilt and grief and unanswered questions. He was still carrying her, still haunted by the woman who had vanished without a trace. "You feel like you're betraying her," Thea whispered, and it wasn't a question. August's jaw tightened, and he rolled onto his back beside her, one arm draped across his eyes. His chest rose and fell with uneven breaths. "I need to finish this first. I need to know what happened to her. Need to close that chapter before I can—" He trailed off, then turned his head to look at her with eyes that burned with equal parts desire and anguish. "You deserve more than a man who's still haunted by ghosts. When I give myself to you, and I will, Thea, I swear I will, I want to be whole. I want to be yours completely." Thea's heart cracked open at the raw honesty in his voice, and she shifted closer, pressing herself against his side, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder. "Then we find her," she said softly. "We find them both, Mira and Nora. And then nothing will stop me from having you." His arm tightened around her, pulling her closer, and his lips pressed against her hair. Nothing in this world. They lay there in the darkness, tangled together, aching and wanting and waiting, and for the first time in 8 years, Thea fell asleep in someone's arms. The days that followed blurred into weeks. August had been hunting Victor alone for 7 years, building Onyx specifically to find the man who had taken Mira, but alone meant blind spots. Thea brought something he didn't have: GTEC's classified files on Victor's old network, her sister's application to Shen Enterprises from a completely different angle, and a hacker's instinct for finding patterns he'd missed. 2 separate investigations, 2 missing women, 2 trails that had gone cold years ago, until they merged into one. They worked side by side from morning until long past midnight, following the ghost of Victor Shen across continents and through layers of shell companies and offshore accounts. Together they traced financial transactions through banks in the Caymans, property records in Singapore, a network of dead ends that August had hit before. But Thea saw connections he'd missed, threads he'd dismissed, patterns that only made sense when you looked at them from her angle instead of his. Diana's 48-hour deadline came and went. Thea ignored the increasingly frantic messages that appeared on her burner phone, ignored the threats and the pleas and the final, chilling promise that Diana would come for her herself. None of it mattered anymore. Only finding Nora mattered, only finding Mira. They slept in the same bed every night, bodies wrapped around each other, but August kept his promise. He wouldn't take her until the ghosts were gone. Some mornings Thea woke to find his hands on her skin, his mouth on her neck, both of them trembling with need before he pulled away with a curse and disappeared into a cold shower. The waiting was torture, but it was also a promise. On the 19th day they found something. A former accountant for Shen Enterprises, hiding in Vancouver under a new name, agreed to talk in exchange for protection. He gave them a location, a private island off the coast of Indonesia that Victor had purchased through 7 layers of shell companies 3 months before Mira disappeared. August chartered a plane within the hour. They landed on a small airstrip in Jakarta as the sun was setting, then transferred to a boat that carried them through dark waters toward an island that didn't appear on any map. Thea stood at the bow with the salt wind in her hair, watching the shape of the island grow larger against the star-filled sky, and felt August's hand close around hers. "Whatever we find," he said quietly, "we face it together." The compound was smaller than she expected. A cluster of white buildings surrounded by jungle, lit by floodlights that turned the night into harsh, artificial day. There were no guards visible, no security checkpoints, nothing but an open gate and a path leading toward the main house. It was too easy. Thea knew it was too easy, but they walked through anyway, because there was no other choice. Victor Shen was waiting for them in a room filled with white furniture and modern art. The man August had once called partner, the man whose trafficking empire August had exposed and destroyed 7 years ago, the man who had vanished into smoke while the world believed him ruined. He held a glass of wine in his hand and wore a smile that made Thea's skin crawl. 7 years? He raised his glass in a mock toast, his accent crisp and cultured. "I was beginning to think you'd never find me, August. I'm almost disappointed it took you this long." August's voice came out flat and dangerous. "Where is she? What did you do to Mira?" Victor tilted his head, amused. "You've spent 7 years looking for a dead woman, haven't you? How exhausting that must have been." Thea felt August go rigid beside her. "But here's the thing." Victor pulled out his phone, tapping the screen with casual indifference. "She's not dead." He turned the phone toward them, and Thea's world stopped. A photograph, 2 women sitting side by side in a bare concrete room, thin and worn, but unmistakably alive. Mira Cole with her brown hair falling past her shoulders, and beside her, holding her hand, looking at the camera with defiance that made Thea's heart stop. Nora. Her sister. Her Nora. Aged by 8 years of captivity. Thinner now, but alive. Alive. Surprise. Victor's smile widened. "They've been keeping each other company all these years. Quite touching, really." Thea couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at her sister's face on that screen. 8 years. 8 years of searching, of grief, of desperate hope, and Nora had been alive this whole time. "What do you want?" August's hand found hers, squeezing hard, his voice barely controlled. "Onyx." Victor set down his wineglass. "The complete system. All your data, all your algorithms, all your dirty little secrets about all those powerful people. Transfer it to me and you can have them both back." "And if I refuse?" Victor's pleasant expression didn't waver. "Then I'm afraid our reunion will be rather shorter than anyone would like." The threat hung in the air between them, cold and absolute. Thea turned to August, her sister's face still burning in her mind, and found him staring at the photograph with an expression of raw, devastating hope. "She's alive," he whispered, and his voice cracked on the words. "Thea, they're both alive." He pulled her close, one hand cradling the back of her head, and she felt him shaking, this man who never showed weakness, trembling because everything he thought he knew had just shattered. "We'll get them back," Thea said into his chest, and her voice was fierce with promise. "Both of them. Whatever it takes." Outside, the Indonesian night pressed against the windows like a living thing, and somewhere in this compound, Nora was waiting. The exchange happened at dawn. Victor led them through the compound to a concrete building at the edge of the jungle, his guards flanking them on every side. Thea's heart pounded against her ribs as she walked, August's hand warm and steady in hers, both of them acutely aware that they were walking into the lion's den with nothing but a flash drive and desperate hope. "The terms are simple," Victor said pleasantly as they approached the building. "You give me Onyx, I give you Nora." He glanced back at August with that empty smile. "Mira stays with me until I've verified the system works. Consider her my insurance policy." August's jaw tightened, but he nodded once. They had expected this. Victor was too smart to give up all his leverage at once. "And once you've verified it?" Thea asked, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. Victor spread his hands in a gesture of magnanimity. "Then you can have her too. I'm a reasonable man, Miss Morris. I have no interest in keeping prisoners who serve no purpose." The door opened, and Thea stopped breathing. A small concrete room, lit by a single bare bulb. A narrow bed against one wall, and sitting on it, hands folded in her lap, eyes lifting to meet Thea's with an expression of stunned disbelief. Nora. 8 years older, thinner, worn down by captivity, but alive and whole and looking at Thea like she was seeing a ghost. "Thea?" Her sister's voice cracked on the name. "Thea, is that really—" Thea crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her sister into her arms. 8 years of grief and hope and desperate searching collapsed into a single moment as she held Nora tight, feeling her sister's body shake with sobs, her own tears streaming down her cheeks. "I found you," Thea whispered into Nora's hair. "I never stopped looking. I never gave up. I know." Nora's voice was muffled against her shoulder. "I knew you wouldn't." Behind them, Victor cleared his throat with theatrical patience. "Touching, truly, but we have business to conclude." August stepped forward, the flash drive held between his fingers. His face was carved from stone, but Thea could see the tension in his shoulders, the barely contained fury in his eyes. "The system," he said flatly. "Everything you asked for." Victor took the drive with the reverence of a man accepting a holy relic. He turned it over in his fingers, examining it from every angle before slipping it into his pocket. "A pleasure doing business with you, August. As always." He gestured to his guards. "Take them back to the boat. They're free to go." "And Mira?" August's voice was rough. "When do I get her back?" Victor's smile widened into something cruel. "Patience. I'll be in touch once I've verified the goods. Shouldn't take more than a few days." There was nothing else to say. Thea helped Nora to her feet, supporting her sister's weight as they walked out of the concrete building and into the humid morning air. The guards escorted them back through the compound, past the white main house where Victor lived, down to the dock where a boat was waiting. It wasn't until they were on the water, the island shrinking behind them, that Thea finally let herself breathe. They brought Nora to a hotel in Jakarta, a suite with soft beds and hot water and room service that Nora stared at like she'd forgotten such things existed. Thea helped her sister shower, washing 8 years of captivity from her skin, brushing tangles from her hair, wrapping her in a fluffy white robe that made her look small and fragile. "I can't believe you're here," Nora kept saying. "I can't believe you found me." August leaned forward in his chair by the window. "Nora, I need to ask you something. Did you ever see another woman there? Her name is Mira Cole." Nora frowned, searching her memory. "Mira? You're looking for her too?" Her eyes moved between August and Thea with sudden curiosity. "Who is she to you?" Thea looked at August. August looked at Thea. Something heavy passed between them. "She was my friend," August said quietly. "Once, a long time ago, she was my fiancée." Nora studied them both for a long moment, her expression shifting into something complicated, part sympathy, part hesitation, part dread. "I saw her," she said finally. "The first time was exactly 1 year after they took me. They brought her to my room." August went very still. She was there. A prisoner? Nora didn't answer immediately. She looked down at her hands, twisting the fabric of her robe between her fingers. "At first, I thought so. They put her in my room, and for 2 weeks we were together constantly. I thought maybe I'd finally have someone to talk to, someone who understood. And then?" Thea prompted gently. "She wasn't like me." Nora's voice dropped. "She wasn't broken, scared. She never cried, never seemed afraid. They would take her out of the room for hours at a time, and when she came back, she was fine. Better than fine." She paused. She looked content. August's face had gone pale. "What are you saying?" "After 2 weeks, they moved her out entirely. I didn't see her again for almost a year." Nora swallowed hard. "And then one day, they were moving furniture into Victor's private house. New things, expensive things, and I saw her through the window." She stopped, her eyes meeting August's with something like grief. "She was kissing him. Victor. Not like a prisoner kisses her captor. Like a woman kisses the man she loves. The sound August made was barely human, a wounded animal sound that seemed to tear itself from somewhere deep in his chest. Thea moved toward him instinctively, but he held up a hand to stop her. "No." His voice was hollow. "No, that's not... Mira wouldn't... I'm sorry." Nora's eyes were bright with tears. "I'm so sorry. But she's not a prisoner. She hasn't been for years. Mira is Victor's partner, his lover." She swallowed hard. "If you're looking for her, she's in his house right now, living there, by choice." August stared at her for a long moment, his face cycling through emotions too fast to track: denial, confusion, betrayal, rage, and finally something that looked like his soul shattering into pieces. He stood abruptly and walked to the window, his back to them both. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper, meant for no one but himself. All this time I thought she was suffering, that I failed her. And she was here, with him." Thea crossed the room and stood beside him, taking his hand in hers. It was ice cold, trembling. "August," she said softly, "I'm here." He looked at her like she was the only real thing in a world that had just revealed itself to be built on lies. "She used me." His voice was raw. "From the beginning. The relationship, the engagement, it was all a lie, wasn't it? All to get access to Onyx." Nora spoke quietly from behind them. "She mentioned something once, years ago, when she still talked to me. Something about a system, something she needed to get for Victor. I didn't understand it then, but now..." August closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, something had changed. The devastation was still there, but beneath it was something harder, colder. The man who had built an empire on secrets and survival. "The Onyx I gave Victor," he said slowly. "It's real, fully functional." Thea's stomach dropped. "August, but it has a fail-safe." He stood abruptly, moving to the window, his silhouette sharp against the Jakarta skyline. "Something I built into the core architecture years ago, a kill switch that only I can activate." "What does it do?" August turned to face them, and there was something almost like satisfaction in his eyes. "When I trigger it, two things happen. First, the entire system corrupts itself. Every algorithm, every database, every piece of data becomes worthless junk. And second..." He paused, a grim smile crossing his face. "It transmits everything Victor has ever done. Every trafficking route, every shell company, every criminal contact, directly to Interpol, Europol, and every major law enforcement agency on the planet." Thea stared at him. "You built a self-destruct that also destroys whoever's holding it." "I built it in case Onyx ever fell into the wrong hands." His eyes found hers. "I never thought I'd use it. But now..." "Mira's not a prisoner," Thea finished. "There's no one to rescue. No reason to let Victor keep the system." "No." August pulled out his phone, his fingers hovering over the screen. "There isn't." He looked at Thea one more time, a long, weighted look that asked a question without words. She nodded. August pressed the button. The Interpol raid happened 18 hours later. Thea watched from the hotel room as news coverage showed helicopters descending on Victor's Island, tactical teams swarming the compound, Indonesian police working alongside international agents. The ticker at the bottom of the screen scrolled with breaking news. Billionaire fugitive Victor Shen arrested. Major human trafficking ring exposed. Dozens of victims recovered. And then the image that made Thea's breath catch. Victor being led out of his White House in handcuffs, his face a mask of fury, and beside him, also in handcuffs, her expression twisted with rage. Mira Cole. August watched the screen in silence, his face unreadable. When the footage showed Mira being loaded into a police vehicle, he turned away. "It's over," he said quietly. "All of it." But Thea knew it wasn't. Not yet. There was still one more confrontation to come. 3 days later at Seattle. The federal holding facility was cold and grey, all concrete and fluorescent lights and the institutional smell of disinfectant. Thea walked beside August through endless corridors, their footsteps echoing in the silence, until they reached a door marked Interview Room 7. Diana Hayes was already inside. She looked older than Thea remembered, smaller somehow, diminished by grief and the weight of what she was about to learn. She sat at a metal table with her hands folded in front of her, and when the door opened, her eyes went first to Thea, then to August, then back to Thea with an expression of cold fury. "You," Diana said, her voice brittle. "You betrayed everything. I gave you purpose. I gave you a mission, and you threw it away for—" "Diana," August's voice cut through her tirade like a blade. "There's something you need to see." A guard opened a second door, and Mira Cole walked in. She was still beautiful. That hadn't changed. Auburn hair, warm brown eyes, the kind of face that made people want to trust her. But there was something different now, something hard and calculating in her expression that Thea suspected had always been there, hidden beneath the mask. Diana's face went white. "Mira?" The name came out broken, disbelieving. "Mira, you're alive?" Mira looked at her mother with an expression of profound indifference. "Hello, Mother." Diana rose from her chair, reaching toward her daughter with trembling hands. For 7 years, I thought he killed you. I spent every day trying to destroy him, trying to get justice for what he did to you." "What he did to me?" Mira laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "August didn't do anything to me. I left him. I don't understand." Diana's voice cracked with confusion, barely a whisper. I don't understand." "Of course you don't." Mira's voice dripped with contempt. "You never understood anything about me. Too busy saving the world to notice your own daughter was drowning. Too focused on your precious G-Tech to see that I was suffocating under your shadow." Diana flinched like she'd been slapped, her words tumbling out desperate and pleading. "Mira, I loved you. Everything you did was for yourself, for your legacy, for your reputation." Mira shook her head slowly. "Victor saw me, really saw me. He offered me a life where I wasn't Diana Hayes' disappointing daughter, where I could be something more." Diana's voice cracked on the words. "He's a monster, a trafficker, a criminal. How could you—" Mira's smile was sharp as a knife as she answered. "How could I love him? Easily. He gave me everything you never could." The silence that followed was devastating. August stepped forward, his voice carefully controlled but edged with steel. "You used me, from the beginning. Victor sent you to get close to me to steal Onyx. Everything between us, the engagement, the plans, the life we were building, it was all a lie." Mira turned to him, and for just a moment something that might have been regret flickered across her features before she answered. "Not all of it. I did care for you, August, in my own way. But Victor," she shrugged, "Victor was always the plan. You were just the mission." August nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd already known, and his voice was hollow when he spoke. "I spent 7 years mourning you. 7 years blaming myself. 7 years afraid to let anyone close, because I thought I'd failed to protect you." Mira's voice held no remorse. "I know. That was rather the point." August looked at her for a long moment. This woman he had loved, had searched for, had built walls around his heart to protect. Then he turned away, his final words thrown over his shoulder like discarded weight. "I hope it was worth it. The life you chose, the man you chose. Because you're going to have a long time to think about it in prison." He walked out without looking back, and Thea followed. Behind them, she could hear Diana's voice breaking into sobs, and Mira's cold silence in response. They didn't speak until they were outside, standing in the Seattle rain, letting the cold water wash away some of the heaviness of what they'd just witnessed. "Are you okay?" Thea asked quietly. August was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I thought finding out the truth would break me, knowing that everything I believed was a lie, that the woman I loved never existed. He turned to face her, and despite everything, there was something like peace in his eyes. But standing in there, looking at her, all I could think was, I'm grateful. Thea frowned, confusion mixing with the rain on her face. Grateful? That she showed me who she really was, that I don't have to carry that ghost anymore. He reached for Thea's hand, intertwining their fingers. And that her betrayal led me to you. Thea squeezed his hand, feeling tears mix with the rain on her cheeks. What happens now? She asked. August pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her, shielding her from the rain with his body. Now, he said softly, we stop chasing ghosts. We stop living in the shadows of people who didn't deserve our devotion. He tilted her chin up, his eyes searching hers. Now we build something new, something real. Her voice was barely a whisper when she asked, Together? He answered with absolute certainty, Together. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Thea felt the last of her walls crumble into dust. That night. The penthouse was quiet when they returned, the city lights glittering through rain-streaked windows, the world outside feeling very far away. August led her to his bedroom without words, their fingers intertwined, and when the door closed behind them, Thea felt like she was stepping into a new life. I've waited so long for this, August murmured, his forehead pressed against hers. For you. For someone real. I'm here. Thea reached up to trace the line of his jaw, the curve of his lips. I'm not going anywhere. He kissed her slowly, deeply, taking his time like they had all the time in the world. His hands found the hem of her shirt and lifted it over her head, revealing skin that had never been touched like this, with reverence, with hunger, with love. You're beautiful, he breathed, and the way he said it made her believe him. She undressed him in return, her fingers trembling as she pushed his shirt from his shoulders, as she traced the lines of his chest, the ridges of muscle beneath warm skin. When they were both bare, standing in the soft light from the windows, August lifted her and carried her to the bed. He laid her down like she was something precious, something sacred. His mouth traced a path from her lips to her throat, from her collarbone to the swell of her breasts. When his tongue found her nipple, Thea arched into him with a moan she couldn't contain. I want to taste every inch of you, he murmured against her skin. I want to learn you, memorize you, make you feel things you've never felt before. His mouth continued its journey, down her rib cage, across her stomach, lower and lower until Thea's breath caught in her throat. August, let me. His voice was rough with need. Let me taste you. And then his mouth was on her, where she was wet and aching, and Thea's world exploded into stars. She cried out, her hands tangling in his hair, her hips moving against his mouth without conscious thought. Let go, he commanded against her flesh. I've got you. She shattered. 8 years of walls crumbling, 8 years of ice melting, 8 years of choosing not to feel dissolving into waves of pleasure so intense she forgot her own name. She screamed, she sobbed, she came apart completely. And when she finally floated back to earth, August was above her, his eyes dark with desire, his body rigid with restraint. I need you, Thea whispered, reaching for him. Please, I need you inside me. He positioned himself at her entrance, his forehead pressed to hers, his breath unsteady. I'll go slow. I'll be careful. And if you want me to stop, I don't want you to stop. She lifted her hips, taking the first inch of him, and they both gasped. I want you. All of you. Now. He entered her slowly, reverently, giving her time to adjust to the feel of him. There was pain, a stretching, burning sensation that made her eyes water. But beneath it was something else, fullness, completion. the feeling of finally being whole. "Don't stop." She wrapped her legs around him, pulling him deeper, and they both moaned. The orgasm built like a wave, rising higher and higher until it crashed over her with devastating force. Her muscles clenched around him, her vision went white, and she screamed his name as pleasure poured through every nerve ending as she finally understood what it meant to be completely and utterly claimed. August followed with a groan that sounded like her name, like a prayer, like a promise. She felt him pulse inside her, felt the heat of his release, felt his body shudder and collapse against hers. They lay tangled together, breathing hard, hearts pounding in sync. "I love you," August whispered against her hair. "I think I've loved you since the moment you walked into my office with your terrible lies and your beautiful eyes." Thea laughed, a watery sound, half joy and half tears. She pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "I love you too, even when I was supposed to destroy you. Especially then." He pulled her closer, wrapping her in his arms like he never intended to let go. "You destroyed me anyway, Thea, just not the way you planned." She lay in the circle of his arms, listening to the rain against the windows and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear. Peace settled over her like a warm blanket, unfamiliar, but welcome, so welcome. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "You still have Onyx, the real one." August was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about that." "And?" Onyx was built on pain, on secrets and shadows and fear. He traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I don't want to be that person anymore, the one who collects other people's darkness." Thea lifted her head to look at him. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe it's time to let go." He met her eyes, and she saw resolution there, and hope. To destroy the real Onyx and build something new, something that helps people instead of controlling them. That's a big decision. It is. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. "But I have help now. Someone I trust. Someone who sees the man I could be, not just the man I was." Thea smiled, leaning up to kiss him softly. Together? Together. Outside, the Seattle rain continued to fall, washing the city clean. Somewhere, Nora was rebuilding her life, one day at a time. Somewhere, Victor and Mira were facing justice for crimes that had stolen years from all of them. But here, in this room, none of that mattered. Thea had come to Seattle to destroy August Kim. Instead, she had found something she never expected. A partner, a lover, a home. Some journeys take you to the place you lost. Others take you to a place you never knew existed. This one had done both. Thank you for watching my story to the end. And where in the world are you watching this from? Knowing my story's journey makes me so happy. August was dangerous, cold, a man from the shadows. But he protected Thea with everything he had. So tell me, would you be drawn to a man like August, or would you run the other way? Let me know in the comments.